In the 3 seconds it took for baby Grace to slip from Nadia's trembling arms, 2 lives shattered, but what the millionaire saw in those falling fragments would change everything he thought he knew about love. Welcome back to our incredible story, family. If this tale has already grabbed your heart and you're ready for an emotional journey that will change how you see love and sacrifice, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling me where you're tuning in from mine, because tomorrow I'm bringing you another powerful story that will move your soul just as deeply. Now let's dive into a story about how one moment of falling can teach us everything about flying. Let us begin. The alarm clock's shrill cry at 4:47 a.m. found Nadia Williams already awake, staring at the water stains spreading across her ceiling like a brown flower blooming in reverse. She'd been listening to 6-year-old Caleb's labored breathing for the past hour, counting the spaces between each wheeze, calculating how many more days she could stretch his inhaler. What would you do if you had to choose between your child's medicine and keeping your job? Drop your thoughts below. I read every comment. 3 jobs. That's what it took to keep their heads barely above water in the city that seemed designed to drown people like her. The early morning cleaning shift at Morrison Financial Tower, afternoon nanny work for the Henderson family, and evening grocery store stocking. 18 hours a day of other people's messes, other people's children, other people's lives that she made smoother while her own frayed at every edge. Nadia pressed her palm against Caleb's forehead, still warm but not the burning heat that had sent them to the emergency room last month. The bill from that visit sat unopened in her kitchen drawer, a white envelope that might as well have contained a death sentence. $3,247 for 4 hours and a prescription she couldn't afford to refill. "Mama?" Caleb's voice was barely a whisper in the pre-dawn darkness. "Right here, baby." She smoothed his hair, the same stubborn cowlick that had driven her crazy when he was a toddler. Now she treasured every imperfection, every proof that he was still here, still fighting. "Just gonna step out for a quick shower." "Okay. Mrs. Patterson will be here in 20 minutes. The shower lasted exactly 3 minutes, long enough to wash yesterday's exhaustion from her skin, but not long enough to waste hot water. In the cracked mirror, Nadia studied the face looking back at her. 28 years old but carrying 40 years of worry in the lines around her eyes. Her mother's cheekbones, her father's stubborn jaw, and something entirely her own in the set of her shoulders, a refusal to break that ran bone deep. Across town, Jonathan Mitchell stood in his marble bathroom, water cascading from rainfall showerheads that cost more than most people's monthly rent. The mirror here was pristine, heated to prevent fogging, reflecting a man who had everything and felt nothing. 42 years old, divorced for 8 months, and successful enough that money had become meaningless, just numbers moving between accounts he rarely bothered to check. His phone buzzed against the granite countertop, 3 missed calls from his assistant, 2 from his lawyer, and a text from his ex-wife about their daughter's recital he'd already forgotten about. Again. The contact name still read Melissa Wife, even though she'd been anything but for months. He kept meaning to change it, but some things were easier to ignore than fix. The penthouse felt cavernous as he moved through rooms designed for entertaining people he no longer cared to see. 47th floor, floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing a city that sparkled like scattered diamonds from this height. From up here, people looked like ants, their struggles microscopic and distant. Sometimes Jonathan wondered if that's how God saw everyone, too small to matter, too far away to touch. His breakfast arrived via private elevator at exactly 7:15 a.m. Steel-cut oats with organic berries, freshly squeezed orange juice, and coffee from beans that cost more per pound than minimum wage workers made in a day. He ate mechanically while scanning financial reports, his mind already shifting into the familiar rhythm of acquisition and expansion that had built his empire. The day stretched ahead with mathematical precision: 9 a.m. board meeting, 11 a.m. conference call with Tokyo investors, lunch with senators whose votes could be purchased like anything else, afternoon site, visit to the new luxury development in Riverside, the one that had displaced 300 low-income families to make room for condos starting at $2 million. He should feel something about that. The displacement, the families scattered to cheaper neighborhoods farther from jobs and schools and hope, but feelings were a luxury Jonathan had learned to live without. They complicated deals, clouded judgment, made you vulnerable to people who would use your heart against you. Better to stay numb, stay focused, stay profitable. Nadia kissed Caleb's forehead before leaving, breathing in the sweet scent of childhood that no amount of sickness could erase. "Be good for Mrs. Patterson, baby. I'll bring you something special tonight. Promise, promise." The lie tasted bitter, but hope was all she had left to give him. Both their paths led toward Riverside that morning, she in her 15-year-old Honda with the rattling exhaust, he in his Tesla that cost more than she'd earn in 5 years. Neither knowing that in 3 hours their worlds would collide in a moment that would strip away every assumption, every barrier, every wall they'd built around their hearts. The morning sun climbed higher, indifferent to human plans, casting long shadows that would soon converge on Maple Street, where baby Grace Henderson would teach two strangers the difference between falling and flying. The Henderson house sat like a wedding cake on Riverside's most exclusive street, all white columns and manicured perfection. Nadia pulled her Honda into the service entrance, the engine's death rattle echoing off marble facades that probably cost more than her entire apartment building. She checked her watch, 11:47 a.m. 13 minutes late because Caleb's coughing fit had lasted longer than usual, and Mrs. Patterson couldn't lift him when his breathing got bad. Inside, chaos reigned. Despite the house's pristine exterior, 2-year-old Grace Henderson had discovered the joy of hurling Cheerios across the kitchen, while her 4-year-old brother Tyler used finger paints on walls that probably cost $10,000 to install. Mrs. Henderson, blonde, Botoxed, and perpetually frazzled, despite having more help than a small corporation, thrust baby Grace into Nadia's arms without ceremony. "Thank God you're here. I'm already late for my yoga session. Tyler's supposed to be at soccer in 20 minutes, and Grace hasn't napped yet, which means she'll be impossible this afternoon." The words tumbled out in an anxious stream. "There's a new client coming by at 2. Some developer looking at the Riverside project. Make sure everything looks perfect." Grace settled against Nadia's chest with the trusting weight of innocence, her tiny fist curling around Nadia's finger. For a moment the world narrowed to this: the soft weight of a child who needed her, the sweet scent of baby shampoo, the way Grace's breathing matched her own. This was why she did it, not for the money that barely covered bills, but for these moments when love transcended transaction. "Mama sad." Tyler looked up from his artwork, paint streaking his cheek like war paint. "Not sad, sweetie. Just tired." Nadia managed a smile, the same one she gave Caleb when he asked why she worked so much. "Let's clean up these paints and get you ready for soccer." The next hour passed in familiar rhythm: bottles and diaper changes, Cheerios swept from Italian marble floors, tiny socks that cost more than her weekly groceries. Grace fought sleep like it was an enemy, arching her back and wailing until Nadia walked her through the house, bouncing gently and humming the same lullaby she sang to Caleb. By 1:30 p.m., exhaustion was winning its war against Nadia's determination. She hadn't eaten since the stale coffee and half a granola bar at 6 a.m., and her morning shift at the cleaning company had included an extra office building when someone called in sick. Her hands trembled slightly as she prepared Grace's bottle, and twice she had to stop and grip the counter when dizziness swept through her. Have you ever pushed yourself past your breaking point for someone you love? Share your story below. Jonathan's Tesla whispered to a stop outside the Henderson mansion at exactly 2 p.m. He rarely visited development sites personally anymore, that's what project managers were for, but this riverside project had attracted protesters, and politicians were making noise about community impact. Better to see it firsthand, make the necessary donations to shut up the right people and move forward with demolition. The house impressed him despite himself. Classical architecture with modern updates, probably worth $12 million in today's market. The kind of place he'd grown up in, before his father taught him that wealth was armor and sentiment was weakness. Mrs. Henderson met him at the door, her smile bright as fresh paint. "Mr. Mitchell, such an honor. Would you like a tour? The house has some unique features that might inspire your luxury development." He followed her through rooms that showcased wealth without taste, everything expensive, nothing meaningful. She chattered about square footage and custom fixtures while he calculated property values and zoning variances. This was his language: numbers, potential, profit margins clean of human complication. They were discussing the wine cellar's temperature control system when they heard it, a child's cry from upstairs, followed by running footsteps. Mrs. Henderson's practiced smile flickered. "That's just Grace. She's been fussy today. Our nanny will handle it." But the crying intensified, and Jonathan could hear desperation creeping into a woman's voice as she tried to soothe the child. Something about the sound made him pause, though he couldn't name why. "Perhaps we should check," he suggested, surprising himself. Mrs. Henderson's smile grew tight. "Really, it's fine. Children cry. That's what we pay people to." The sound of feet on stairs interrupted her, and Nadia appeared at the top of the grand staircase, Grace wailing in her arms. Even from the foyer below, Jonathan could see the exhaustion etched in every line of Nadia's body. She moved like someone running on empty, each step careful but uncertain. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Henderson," Nadia called down, her voice strained. "Grace won't settle, and I think she might be running a fever. Should I?" That's when it happened. Time crystallized into individual frames, each second stretching like taffy in the summer sun. Nadia's foot caught the edge of the oriental runner that had shifted on the polished marble step. Her ankle twisted, sending a sharp crack through the foyer's perfect acoustics. Her arms instinctively went out for balance, and baby Grace, sweet, trusting Grace, slipped from her embrace. Jonathan watched the baby fall as if observing an equation in motion, gravity multiplied by distance, divided by the impossible fragility of life. But what he saw in Nadia's face in that eternal moment wasn't carelessness or negligence. It was a mother's agony. Her own body followed Grace downward, not away from the falling child but toward her, every instinct screaming to catch, to protect, to absorb the impact with her own flesh if necessary. Nadia's shoulder hit the marble step with a sickening crack, but her arms never stopped reaching for Grace, never stopped trying to break the baby's fall even as her own body crumpled. She caught Grace 18 inches from the floor. Both of them landed hard, Nadia's body curved around the baby like a human shield, her back taking the brunt of their combined impact against the marble. Grace's cries pierced the sudden silence, but they were the healthy wails of fear, not injury. Mrs. Henderson screamed. Jonathan stood frozen, his mind struggling to process what he'd witnessed, not the clumsy accident he'd expected to see, but something that looked remarkably like sacrifice. Nadia struggled to sit up, her left arm hanging at an odd angle, blood trickling from where her head had hit the step. But her first words weren't about her own pain. "Is she okay? Grace? Is Grace okay?" Her voice broke on the child's name, tears streaming down her face as she tried to examine the baby with her one good arm. The moment suspended itself in crystal clarity, a broken woman asking about someone else's child, while her own body screamed in agony, a millionaire confronting assumptions that crumbled like sand, and a baby whose tears were already quieting in arms that had chosen her safety over self-preservation. Everything Jonathan thought he understood about people, about worth, about the difference between those who mattered and those who didn't, lay shattered on his marble floor along with two bodies that had just taught him the true meaning of love. The silence that followed Grace's cries felt dense as fog, broken only by the tick of the grandfather clock and Nadia's ragged breathing. Mrs. Henderson's scream had died in her throat, replaced by something worse, the calculating look of someone tallying damages, both financial and social. "Oh my God," she whispered, but her hands reached for Grace, not for Nadia, who remained crumpled against the marble steps. "Is she hurt? Please tell me she's not hurt." Jonathan found himself moving before his mind caught up, kneeling beside Nadia, whose face had gone ashen. Up close he could see the tremor in her hands, the way she bit her lip to keep from crying out, as she tried to shift her weight off her injured shoulder. "Don't move," he said quietly, his voice carrying an authority that made both women look at him. "You might have a concussion." Nadia's eyes met his for the first time, and what he saw there wasn't what he'd expected. Not the shifty guilt of someone caught in negligence, not the calculating look of someone preparing to blame circumstances. Instead he saw raw terror, not for herself, but radiating outward like heat from a flame. "My job," she whispered, so quietly, only he could hear. "I can't lose my job." The words hit him like a physical blow. Here she sat, possibly concussed, definitely injured, and her first concern wasn't medical bills or pain medication. It was the paycheck that kept her world spinning. "Mrs. Henderson," Jonathan stood, something cold and sharp entering his voice. "Call 911. "But is that necessary? I mean, she seems fine, and Grace is fine, so maybe we could just call now." The authority in his tone brooked no argument, and Mrs. Henderson fumbled for her phone with shaking fingers, but Jonathan could already see the narrative forming behind her perfectly made-up eyes: the clumsy nanny who dropped her precious baby, the lawsuit that might follow, the social embarrassment of having that kind of person in her home. While Mrs. Henderson spoke to the dispatcher in hushed, urgent tones, Jonathan crouched beside Nadia again. She was trying to examine Grace with her good arm, making soft shushing sounds that seemed to calm the baby more effectively than all of Mrs. Henderson's frantic pacing. "She's okay," he said gently. "The baby is okay." Nadia's shoulders sagged with relief, so profound it made her wince. "Thank God. Oh, thank God." She pressed a careful kiss to Grace's forehead. "I'm so sorry, sweet girl. I'm so sorry." "What happened?" The question came out harder than Jonathan intended, shaped by years of depositions and boardroom interrogations. Nadia flinched as if he'd struck her. The rug moved. "My ankle twisted. I reached for her. I swear I tried to." "I know." The words surprised him. "I saw." Something flickered across her face, hope maybe, or disbelief that someone had actually witnessed her desperate attempt to save Grace rather than just the fall itself. Mrs. Henderson finished her call and approached them with the careful steps of someone navigating a minefield. "The ambulance is coming. Nadia, I'm sure you understand that we'll need to reassess your employment situation. I mean, with Grace's safety being paramount and all." The words hung in the air like poison gas. Jonathan watched Nadia's face crumple, watched her try to hold it together even as her world disintegrated around her injured body. "Please," Nadia's voice broke. "Mrs. Henderson, please. I've been with your family for 8 months. I love Grace and Tyler like my own. This was an accident, a terrible accident, but I would never. I'm sure you wouldn't intentionally harm her, but accidents happen when people are distracted or not fully present, and frankly you have seemed rather tired lately. What assumptions do we make about people in crisis? How quick are we to judge someone's worth by their worst moment? Let me know your thoughts." Jonathan felt something hot and unfamiliar rising in his chest, anger, but not the cold, calculated kind he used in business. This was personal, protective, and entirely unexpected. "She saved your daughter." Both women looked at him in surprise. Mrs. Henderson's perfectly shaped eyebrows drew together in confusion. "I'm sorry. What?" She saved Grace. Jonathan's voice grew stronger with each word. "I watched it happen. When she fell, her first instinct wasn't self-preservation. She threw herself toward the baby, not away from her. She used her own body to break Grace's fall." Mrs. Henderson's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. "But she dropped her in the first place. She slipped on your rug. A rug that was loose on polished marble, a lawsuit waiting to happen. If you want to talk about liability." The lawyer in him had awakened, cold and sharp. "What I saw was a woman who chose to sacrifice her own safety for your child's. Most people would have tried to save themselves." Nadia stared at him with something like wonder, as if no one had ever defended her before. The expression made something twist painfully in Jonathan's chest. The sound of sirens grew louder, and Mrs. Henderson began pacing again, her heels clicking against marble like a countdown timer. "This is going to be all over the neighborhood. People will talk. They'll say I can't even manage my own household staff." "Your household staff just took a marble step to the spine for your daughter," Jonathan said quietly. "If people talk, maybe they should talk about that." The paramedics arrived in a flurry of professional efficiency, their equipment cases clattering against the pristine floors. As they worked to stabilize Nadia's shoulder and check Grace for injuries, Jonathan found himself studying the scene with new eyes. Nadia answered every question about Grace's condition with perfect clarity despite her own obvious pain. She knew the baby's feeding schedule, her allergies, the exact timeline of every symptom. She spoke about Grace with the detailed knowledge that came from genuine care, not just professional obligation. Mrs. Henderson, meanwhile, couldn't remember when Grace had last eaten or whether she'd seemed fussy before the fall. She hovered at the edges, wringing her hands and asking repeatedly about liability and insurance. "Ma'am, we're going to transport both of them to Presbyterian Hospital for evaluation," the lead paramedic informed Mrs. Henderson. "Standard procedure for head injuries and falls involving children." "Both of them?" Mrs. Henderson's voice climbed an octave. "Is that really necessary? I mean, the baby seems fine, and as for," she gestured vaguely toward Nadia, "well, she's not really my responsibility outside of work hours." The paramedic stared at her for a long moment. "The woman who's injured was caring for your child when the accident occurred. That makes it a workplace injury. You'll need to contact your insurance company." As they loaded Nadia onto a stretcher, she grabbed Jonathan's sleeve with her good hand. Her grip was surprisingly strong for someone so injured. "Please," she whispered urgently. "My son, Caleb. He's at 1247 Oak Street, apartment 4B. Mrs. Patterson is watching him, but she leaves at 6, and he needs his inhaler at 8, and I'll take care of it," Jonathan heard himself say, though he had no idea how. Relief flooded her features. "Thank you, God, thank you." As the ambulance pulled away, Jonathan stood in the Hendersons' marble foyer, surrounded by the echoes of assumptions shattered and prejudices exposed. Mrs. Henderson was already on her phone with her lawyer, spinning the story into something that would protect her reputation. But Jonathan couldn't stop thinking about Nadia's face in those eternal seconds when Grace fell, the pure, selfless terror of a mother watching a child in danger. He'd built his fortune on reading people, on understanding their motivations and weaknesses. What he'd seen in Nadia's eyes wasn't the calculation of someone angling for sympathy or money. It was love, raw, unguarded, and willing to bleed. For the first time in years, Jonathan Mitchell felt something crack inside the fortress he'd built around his heart. And for reasons he couldn't yet name, he knew his life had just changed as dramatically as if he'd been the one to fall down those marble steps. The grandfather clock chimed 3 p.m., and somewhere across town, a 6-year-old boy named Caleb was about to learn that sometimes angels came disguised as strangers. Presbyterian Hospital smelled like disinfectant and broken dreams, a combination that hit Jonathan the moment he walked through the sliding glass doors. He'd been in hospitals before: board meetings in executive conference rooms, charity photo ops in pediatric wings, but never like this, never carrying a stranger's keys and the weight of a promise he wasn't sure he could keep. The emergency room buzzed with controlled chaos: crying children, worried parents, overworked nurses moving between curtain spaces with practiced efficiency. Jonathan felt absurdly out of place in his $1,000 suit, like a peacock stumbling into a henhouse. "I'm looking for Nadia Williams," he told the receptionist, a tired-looking woman whose name tag read Beverly, and whose eyes said she'd seen everything twice. "She came in about an hour ago with a head injury." Beverly's fingers clicked across her keyboard. "Are you family?" Jonathan paused, realizing he had no idea what he was. "I witnessed her accident. I have information about her son. Room 7. But visiting hours don't start until—" "Please." The word came out rougher than intended. "She's worried about her child. She needs to know he's safe." Something in his voice must have convinced Beverly, because she buzzed him through without another word. He found Nadia propped up in a narrow bed, her left arm in a sling, a butterfly bandage covering the gash on her forehead. She looked smaller somehow, diminished by the hospital gown and the maze of wires connecting her to various monitors, but her eyes were alert, fixed on the clock above the door with an intensity that made his chest tighten. "Mr. Mitchell?" She struggled to sit up straighter. "You came. I wasn't sure. I mean, you don't even know me." Neither did the Good Samaritan. The reference surprised him. He hadn't thought about Sunday school lessons in 20 years. "How are you feeling?" "Like I got hit by a truck." She managed a weak smile. "But the doctors say no concussion, just a dislocated shoulder and some bruised ribs. They want to keep me for observation, but I can't afford. I need to get to Caleb." Jonathan pulled a chair closer to her bed, noting how she flinched when he moved too quickly. "Tell me about your son." The question transformed her face, worry giving way to fierce love. "He's 6. Asthma, really bad asthma. He needs his inhaler every 4 hours, and sometimes more if he's having an episode. Mrs. Patterson, she's good with him, but she's 83, and can't always tell when his breathing gets bad." She fumbled in her purse with her good hand, pulling out a cracked phone and a worn photograph. The picture showed a little boy with Nadia's eyes and a smile that could power the city, sitting in a hospital bed surrounded by teddy bears. "That was last month," she said quietly. "Emergency room, just like this one. 3 days in pediatric ICU because I couldn't afford his preventive medication. The doctors say if it happens again—" She didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. Jonathan had heard those same unfinished threats from doctors when his daughter Emma was born with a heart defect, before his wealth had made such concerns irrelevant. "What's his full name and address?" Jonathan pulled out his phone. "I'll send someone to check on him." Nadia rattled off the information, then grabbed his wrist with surprising strength. "You don't understand. Mrs. Patterson leaves at 6. If Caleb's alone when his breathing gets bad," her voice cracked. "He tries to be brave, but he's just a baby. He gets scared when he can't breathe, and that makes it worse." Jonathan looked at the clock, 4:47 p.m. Just over an hour. "I'll go myself." The words hung in the air between them, unexpected as thunder on a clear day. Nadia stared at him as if he'd offered to sprout wings and fly. "You would do that? For us? But why?" It was a fair question, and one he couldn't answer honestly because he didn't understand it himself. 6 hours ago, people like Nadia had been statistical abstractions, the inevitable casualties of progress, regrettable but necessary for the greater good of economic development. Now she had a face, a name, a sick child who needed medicine they couldn't afford. When was the last time a stranger's crisis became your priority? Share a moment when someone unexpected showed up for you. "Because it's the right thing to do," he said finally, and realized he couldn't remember the last time he'd made a decision based on rightness rather than profit. Nadia's eyes filled with tears. "I don't know how to thank you." "Get better. That's thanks enough." He was halfway to the door when her voice stopped him. "Mr. Mitchell, there's something you should know about Mrs. Henderson, about why I was so tired today." Jonathan turned back, something cold settling in his stomach at her tone. "She's been cutting my hours. 3 hours here, 2 hours there, says the family doesn't need as much help anymore, but she still expects the same level of service, still wants me available whenever she calls." Nadia's voice grew stronger, anger cutting through exhaustion. "I've been picking up extra shifts everywhere I can, working 18-hour days just to make rent. Today I was running on 3 hours of sleep, because Caleb was up all night coughing. Why didn't you tell her no?" Nadia laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Tell Margaret Henderson no? She's got connections all over the city. One bad reference from her and I'd never work in childcare again. You think other wealthy families want to hire someone who didn't work out with the Hendersons?" Jonathan felt something ugly twist in his chest. Recognition. He'd used his influence the same way countless times, holding people's livelihoods hostage to ensure compliance. It was just business, he'd always told himself. Supply and demand, leverage and negotiation. He'd never considered what it felt like to be on the other end of that equation. "She was setting you up to fail," he said quietly. "Maybe. Or maybe she just needed a reason to let me go that wouldn't look bad to her friends." Nadia adjusted her sling, wincing. Wealthy people, they don't like to think of themselves as cruel, so they create situations where the help eliminates themselves. The words hit like arrows, each one finding its mark in the fortress of Jonathan's self-image. How many people had he eliminated that way? How many Nadias had he pushed until they broke, then blamed their breaking for his own convenience? His phone buzzed a text from his assistant about the evening's dinner meeting with investors, the Riverside Development Project, where families like Nadia's were being displaced to make room for his luxury condos. Suddenly the profit margins looked different, not clean numbers on a spreadsheet, but faces like Caleb's, dreams deferred, children who couldn't breathe. "I have to go," he said, but he found himself reluctant to leave. Something about this sterile room had become a sanctuary from the calculating world outside. "Mr. Mitchell?" Nadia's voice was soft. "When you see Caleb, tell him Mama's okay and she'll be home soon, and if he's scared, remind him what I always say, brave hearts beat stronger." Jonathan nodded, memorizing the words. As he reached the door, her voice followed him one more time. "And Mr. Mitchell? Be careful driving to Oak Street. It's not the kind of neighborhood you're used to." The warning should have made him reconsider. Instead, it made him more determined. For the first time in years, Jonathan Mitchell was about to step outside his fortress of wealth and privilege into a world where brave hearts beat stronger because they had to. The sliding doors of the hospital opened before him like a portal to somewhere he'd never been but desperately needed to go. Somewhere real. Somewhere that mattered. Somewhere a 6-year-old boy was learning to breathe without his mother, waiting for angels who came disguised as strangers in expensive suits. The GPS led Jonathan through neighborhoods that existed in a different universe from his penthouse world. Manicured lawns gave way to chain-link fences, luxury cars to rusty pickups, hope to something harder and more desperate. By the time he reached Oak Street, the sun was casting long shadows between buildings that had seen better decades, and Jonathan was questioning every assumption he'd ever made about geography and worth. 1247 Oak Street looked like it was held together by paint and prayer. The 3-story apartment building sagged in the middle, its brick facade stained with years of neglect. A broken playground sat in the courtyard, its swing sets twisted into abstract sculptures of urban decay. This was where Nadia called home. This was where she brought her sick son every night after caring for other people's children in million-dollar mansions. Jonathan climbed stairs that creaked ominous warnings under his weight, past doors that leaked cooking smells, and television laughter, and the occasional argument. Apartment 4B sat at the end of a hallway lit by a single flickering bulb that cast dancing shadows on peeling wallpaper. He knocked, and the door opened to reveal a woman who could have been carved from ancient oak, weathered but unbroken, with silver hair pulled back severely and eyes that missed nothing. "You must be the man Nadia called about," Mrs. Patterson said, looking him up and down with undisguised suspicion. "Fancy clothes for this neighborhood." "Yes, ma'am, Jonathan Mitchell. I'm here to check on Caleb." She stepped aside reluctantly, and Jonathan entered a world compressed into 4 small rooms. The apartment was spotless, despite its age, every surface scrubbed clean, every possession in its designated place. But it was the details that broke his heart: the duct tape holding the couch together, the television that belonged in a museum, the single photograph on the mantel showing Nadia and Caleb at some happier time, both of them laughing at something beyond the camera's view. "Caleb, honey, there's someone here to see you," Mrs. Patterson called toward the bedroom. A small voice responded, barely audible over the wheeze that accompanied each word. "Is it Mama?" "No, baby. But it's someone Mama sent." The boy who emerged from the bedroom was smaller than Jonathan had expected, pale in the way that spoke of too many sick days and not enough sunlight. But his eyes were Nadia's, intelligent, watchful, carrying wisdom that no 6-year-old should possess. He clutched an inhaler in one small fist and a worn teddy bear in the other. "Hi," Caleb said shyly, studying Jonathan with curious intensity. "You're really tall." Jonathan found himself smiling, the first genuine smile he'd managed in months. "You're right. I am pretty tall. Your mama asked me to check on you. She wanted you to know she's okay and she'll be home soon." "Is she hurt bad?" The question came out between careful breaths, as if Caleb was rationing his air. "Just a bump on the head and a hurt shoulder. The doctors are taking good care of her." Jonathan crouched down to Caleb's level, something he'd learned years ago with his own daughter. "She also told me to remind you brave hearts beat stronger." Caleb's face lit up like sunrise. "That's our saying. Mama made it up when I was little and got scared during my breathing attacks. She said my heart is brave because it keeps beating even when my lungs don't work right." The simple wisdom of it hit Jonathan like a physical blow. Here was a child who'd learned to find strength in struggle, to transform fear into courage through the power of a mother's love. When had he last felt that kind of bravery? When had he last faced anything that required genuine courage rather than calculated risk? What simple wisdom has a child taught you about life? Drop a comment sharing how a young person changed your perspective. "Mr. Patterson is nice," Caleb continued, settling beside Jonathan on the patched couch, "but she can't hear very good. Sometimes when I can't breathe right, I have to be really loud before she notices." "How often do you have trouble breathing?" Jonathan asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to hear the answer. "Every day, mostly. But worse when it's cold or when Mama has to work late, and I get worried." Caleb demonstrated his inhaler technique with practiced ease. 2 puffs every 4 hours, more if I need it. Mama showed me how to count on the clock." Jonathan looked around the apartment with new eyes, seeing evidence of a mother's desperate love everywhere. Medicine bottles arranged with military precision on the kitchen counter, each labeled with careful handwriting about dosages and timing. A humidifier running constantly in the corner, adding moisture to air that fought Caleb's lungs every moment. A notebook beside the phone filled with emergency numbers and detailed instructions for every possible scenario. This wasn't neglect or carelessness, this was a woman fighting a war she couldn't afford to lose, using weapons like love and determination against an enemy that required money she didn't have. "Caleb," Mrs. Patterson called from the kitchen, "it's time for your evening dose." Jonathan watched the ritual unfold, Mrs. Patterson counting out pills from bottles that looked expensive, Caleb accepting them without complaint, both of them going through motions worn smooth by repetition. But when Mrs. Patterson held up one particular bottle, smaller than the others, nearly empty, her face grew troubled. "This is his rescue inhaler," she told Jonathan quietly. "The one for emergencies. Nadia mentioned it's running low, but she hasn't been able to refill it yet." "Why not?" Jonathan asked, though he suspected he knew. "Insurance only covers one per month. These run about $80 each without coverage." Mrs. Patterson's voice carried 40 years of watching children suffer, while adults counted pennies. "Nadia's been stretching this one by having Caleb use his regular inhaler more often, but if he has a bad attack—" She didn't finish the sentence, but the implication hung in the air like smoke. Jonathan thought about the lunch he'd had yesterday, $200 for a meal he'd barely touched, wine that cost more than a month of Caleb's medicine. "I'll take care of it," he said, pulling out his phone to research the nearest 24-hour pharmacy. "That's kind of you, but Nadia's proud. She won't take charity." "It's not charity. It's—" Jonathan paused, struggling to name what it actually was. Penance? Investment? The first decent thing he'd done in years? "It's what neighbors do for each other." Mrs. Patterson studied him with those sharp eyes. "You don't look like the kind of man who has neighbors." She was right, and they both knew it. Jonathan lived in a tower above the clouds, surrounded by people who were paid to agree with him and smile at his jokes. When had he last had a real conversation with someone who didn't want something from him? "Can you tell me about Nadia?" he asked impulsively. "How she ended up here raising Caleb alone?" Mrs. Patterson glanced toward Caleb, who was absorbed in coloring book that looked like it had been through several children, then lowered her voice. "Caleb's father left when the boy was diagnosed, couldn't handle having a sick child, I guess. Nadia was finishing nursing school then, had dreams of working pediatric ICU, helping kids like her son, but between Caleb's medical bills and losing her partner's income, she had to drop out." The story unfolded in quiet pieces, a young woman who'd sacrificed her dreams to care for her child, who'd taken job after job to keep them afloat, who'd worked herself to exhaustion rather than ask for help she was too proud to accept. "She's good people," Mrs. Patterson concluded. "The kind who'd give you her last dollar if you needed it more. World needs more like her, fewer like—" She gestured vaguely at Jonathan's expensive suit. "Fewer like me," he finished for her. "I didn't say that." "You didn't have to." As if summoned by their conversation, Caleb appeared beside them, his breathing slightly labored from the excitement of having a visitor. "Mister, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Are you rich?" The directness of the question caught Jonathan off guard. "Why do you ask? Your clothes look expensive, and your car outside is really shiny." Caleb tilted his head, considering, "Mama says rich people sometimes help poor people, but mostly they just help other rich people." "Which kind are you?" Out of the mouths of babes, Jonathan looked into those honest eyes and saw his entire life reflected back at him, decades of helping other rich people get richer while poor people like Nadia worked themselves to death for scraps. "I don't know yet," he answered truthfully, "but I'm trying to figure it out." Caleb nodded solemnly, as if this was a perfectly reasonable response. "Mama says trying is the first part of doing." At 7:45 p.m., Jonathan's phone buzzed with a text from his assistant. "Where are you? Investors are waiting at the restaurant." He stared at the message, then at Caleb counting out his evening medications, then at the photograph on the mantel of a mother and son who'd learned to find joy despite everything working against them. For the first time in his career, Jonathan Mitchell turned off his phone and chose to disappoint rich people in favor of staying with someone who truly needed him. The breach in his carefully constructed world was widening, and he found himself hoping it was too late to repair. By the time Jonathan returned from the 24-hour pharmacy with Caleb's rescue inhaler and a bag full of other medications the boy needed, the apartment felt different. Less like a place he was visiting and more like somewhere he belonged, at least temporarily. Mrs. Patterson had left with grateful tears and a stern reminder to call if Caleb had any trouble breathing, leaving Jonathan alone with a 6-year-old who seemed remarkably unimpressed by his wealth. "You came back," Caleb observed from his position on the couch, where he was arranging his army of stuffed animals in what appeared to be a complex battle formation. "I told you I would." Adults sometimes say things they don't mean. Not Mama, but other adults. Caleb handed him a worn teddy bear with one missing eye. "This is Captain Wheeze. He's the bravest because he has asthma too but still leads the army." Jonathan accepted Captain Wheeze with the solemnity the moment required. "He looks like a strong leader." "He is. Mama made up stories about him when I was little, and got scared at night. Want to hear one?" Before Jonathan could answer, Caleb launched into an elaborate tale about Captain Wheeze's adventures in the land of clear breathing, where no one ever needed inhalers and the air tasted like cotton candy. The boy's imagination was boundless, his storytelling animated despite the careful way he paused to breathe between sentences. Watching Caleb weave magic from hardship, Jonathan felt something long frozen begin to thaw in his chest. When had he last listened to a child's story? When had he last seen wonder transform ordinary objects into epic adventures? His phone, still silenced, lit up repeatedly with ignored calls and messages. The business dinner he was missing would cost him millions in potential deals. Stock prices might fluctuate based on his absence. Board members would question his commitment. None of it seemed to matter. "Are you hungry?" Jonathan asked when Caleb finished his story. "I could order us some food. Mama usually makes grilled cheese and tomato soup when she gets home from work. It's my favorite because the cheese gets all stretchy." Caleb demonstrated the proper cheese stretching technique with enthusiastic arm movements. "But I don't think you know how to make grilled cheese." "You're right, I don't." Jonathan realized with embarrassment that he couldn't remember the last time he'd cooked anything more complex than coffee. "Want to teach me?" The process of making grilled cheese under Caleb's supervision proved both humbling and oddly therapeutic. Jonathan, who could negotiate billion-dollar deals without breaking a sweat, burned the first sandwich and nearly set off the smoke alarm. Caleb found this hilarious rather than alarming, giggling between wheezes as he explained the finer points of butter distribution and heat management. "The secret is you have to be patient," Caleb said sagely, perched on a kitchen chair so he could supervise. "Mama says good things take time, but great things take even more time. Your mama's pretty smart. She's the smartest person in the whole world. Smarter than doctors even, because she knew I needed different medicine before the doctors figured it out." Pride radiated from every word. "She reads medical books from the library and learns about asthma research and asks the doctors really hard questions until they listen." Jonathan flipped the sandwich more carefully this time, golden brown and perfectly crispy. "Must be scary sometimes, being sick. Sometimes, especially at night when I can't breathe good and Mama's not here." Caleb's voice grew smaller. "I try to be brave like Captain Wheeze, but it's hard when you're little and your chest hurts." The casual way Caleb discussed his own mortality, the matter-of-fact acceptance of fear and pain that would crush most adults, made Jonathan's throat tighten. This child had faced more real danger in 6 years than Jonathan had in 42 years of cushioned existence. "What helps when you get scared?" Jonathan asked quietly. "I think about Mama, about how she always comes home even when she's really tired. And I think about Captain Wheeze and how he's brave even when he's scared. Mama says being brave doesn't mean you're not afraid, it means you do the right thing even when you are afraid." When has a child's perspective completely changed how you see the world? Share your moment of learning from the youngest teacher. They ate their grilled cheese and tomato soup sitting on the living room floor, using the coffee table as their dining surface. Caleb insisted on proper presentation, napkins folded just so, soup bowls positioned for optimal dunking, and Captain Wheeze given his own tiny portion because brave bears need to eat too. As they ate, Caleb peppered Jonathan with questions that revealed both innocent curiosity and startling insight. "Do you have kids?" "I have a daughter, Emma. She's about your age." Jonathan pulled out his phone, showing Caleb a photo from Emma's last birthday party, all designer dresses and expensive decorations, but somehow lifeless compared to this simple meal on the floor. "She's pretty. Does she live with you?" "No, she lives with her mama. I don't see her as much as I should." The admission tasted bitter, seasoned with years of prioritizing profit over presence. "That's sad. Dads should see their kids lots. Do you read her stories?" "Not really. She has other people who do that." Caleb considered this with the gravity of a judge. "Other people can't love her like you do though. Love stories are the best kind." The simple truth hit like a sledgehammer to Jonathan's carefully constructed defenses. He had other people for everything: childcare, housekeeping, even birthday card selection. When had he last done something for Emma with his own hands, his own heart? "You're right," Jonathan said quietly. "I should read her more stories." "Want to practice on me? Mama keeps books in my room for when I can't sleep because of my breathing." They moved to Caleb's bedroom, a space that somehow felt both cramped and cozy. The twin bed was covered with a handmade quilt that showed signs of careful mending, and the walls were decorated with drawings that revealed artistic talent and unlimited imagination. Medical equipment sat beside teddy bears, reality and childhood dreams coexisting in careful balance. Jonathan chose a book about a dragon who was afraid of his own fire, and as he read aloud, something magical happened. His voice, trained for boardroom presentations and shareholder meetings, softened into something warmer, more human. Caleb snuggled against his side, occasionally commenting on the story or asking questions that showed he was following every word despite his increasing drowsiness. "The dragon just needed someone to believe in him," Caleb murmured as the story ended. "That's why he could finally breathe fire without being scared." That's a pretty good moral to the story. Mama says everyone needs someone to believe in them, even grown-ups. Caleb's eyes were heavy now, but he fought sleep the way children do when something important is happening. "Do you have someone who believes in you?" The question pierced something deep in Jonathan's chest. Did he? His ex-wife had believed in his earning potential. His employees believed in his ability to sign their paychecks. His investors believed in his capacity to make them money. But who believed in him as a person? Who saw past the suits and the bank accounts to whatever remained of his soul? "I'm not sure," he admitted. "That's okay. Sometimes you have to believe in yourself first, and then other people learn how." Caleb's breathing was evening out into the rhythm of approaching sleep. "I believe you're a good person. You came to take care of me even though you don't know me. That's what good people do." Jonathan sat in the growing darkness of Caleb's room, listening to the boy's breathing gradually deepen into healthy sleep, and felt something fundamental shift inside him. This child, this brave, wise, impossibly resilient child, believed in him based on nothing more than simple kindness. When had anyone ever set the bar so low and somehow made him want to jump so much higher? His phone buzzed again, and this time he looked 17 missed calls, 43 unread messages, and a text from his assistant that read, "You are gent board meeting moved to tomorrow morning. They want explanations." Jonathan turned the phone face down and pulled the quilt up to Caleb's chin, the way he dimly remembered his own mother doing a lifetime ago. Outside, the city hummed with its endless hunger for more money, more power, more of everything that suddenly seemed hollow as an empty shell. Inside this small apartment that cost less per month than he spent on wine, Jonathan Mitchell learned what it felt like to be rich in the ways that actually mattered, and for the first time in years, he didn't want to be anywhere else. The healing had begun, fragile as new skin over old wounds, but real as the child sleeping peacefully beside him. Jonathan woke to the sound of his phone buzzing against the coffee table like an angry wasp. Gray morning light filtered through thin curtains that had seen better decades, and for a disorienting moment he couldn't remember where he was. The strange bed, the medical equipment humming quietly in the corner, the small warm body beside him breathing in careful measured rhythms. Caleb, Nadia, the hospital. Everything came flooding back as he carefully extracted himself from the narrow bed where he'd fallen asleep reading stories, his expensive suit wrinkled beyond salvage. The phone continued its insistent buzzing. 27 missed calls. The most recent from James Morrison, chairman of his board, a man who hadn't called Jonathan directly in 3 years. "Where the hell are you?" Morrison's voice could have cut glass when Jonathan finally answered. "The Riverside investors flew in from Tokyo. They're threatening to pull out of the entire project. Do you have any idea how much money you've cost us with your disappearing act?" Jonathan glanced toward Caleb's room, where he could hear the boy's morning routine inhaler, followed by careful coughing, followed by the shuffle of small feet toward the bathroom. Such ordinary sounds, but they'd become the rhythm of something real. "I had an emergency." "What kind of emergency? Did someone die? Are you in the hospital?" Because those are the only acceptable reasons for standing up $40 billion in foreign investment. $40 billion. The number should have sent adrenaline shooting through his veins, should have had him calling for his driver and racing toward damage control. Instead, he found himself calculating how many rescue inhalers that money could buy. How many families like Nadia's could breathe easier. "I'm fine. I'll be in the office within the hour." You better have a damn good explanation, Jonathan. The board is asking questions about your commitment, your judgment. There are rumors you've been distracted lately. The line went dead, leaving Jonathan staring at his phone in the growing morning light. Through the thin walls, he could hear Caleb humming tunelessly as he got dressed, the same song Nadia had been humming when she held baby Grace, something soft and wordless that spoke of love in languages older than profit margins. "Mr. Jonathan?" Caleb appeared in the doorway, fully dressed but with his shirt buttoned crooked and his hair sticking up at impossible angles. "Are you okay? You look sad." "Just work stuff, buddy. Nothing for you to worry about." But Caleb studied him with those two wise eyes, the same way his mother had looked at Jonathan in the hospital, seeing deeper than surface explanations. "Mama says when grown-ups say, 'Don't worry,' that usually means there's something big to worry about." Smart kid. Too smart. Jonathan's second phone, his personal line, rang before he could respond. The caller ID made his stomach drop. Margaret Henderson. "I trust you slept well." Her voice dripped with false sweetness and barely contained rage. "While you were playing Good Samaritan, I've been dealing with the aftermath of your little stunt yesterday." "What are you talking about?" "Don't play innocent with me, Jonathan. Defending that nanny, undermining my authority in front of the paramedics, making me look like some heartless villain. Do you have any idea how this looks to my social circle?" Jonathan found himself gripping the phone tighter. "How it looks? A woman was injured caring for your child. She potentially saved Grace's life. She dropped my baby. And now, thanks to your interference, I'm dealing with workers' compensation claims, insurance investigators and lawyers asking questions about my household management practices." Margaret's voice climbed toward hysteria. "My husband is furious. This could affect his Senate campaign. Have you ever had to choose between doing what's right and protecting your reputation? Tell us about a time you stood up for someone when it cost you something." "So fire me from the development project," Jonathan said quietly. "Find another contractor." The silence stretched so long he wondered if the call had dropped. "Excuse me." "You heard me. If my support for Nadia is that problematic for you, withdraw from the Riverside project. I'll find other investors." "Are you insane? You're willing to torpedo a billion-dollar development over some nanny who was too careless to watch her step. Each word hit like a physical blow, and Jonathan realized he was seeing Margaret Henderson clearly for the first time, not as a client to be managed, but as exactly the kind of person he'd been becoming. Someone who measured human worth in dollars and saw other people's pain as inconvenience. Her name is Nadia Williams. She has a 6-year-old son with severe asthma. She works 18 hours a day to afford his medication. And yesterday she threw herself down marble steps to protect your daughter. How do you know all that? Margaret's voice turned suspicious, dangerous. Have you been investigating me? My staff? I've been getting to know the person you're trying to destroy. Getting to know her. Margaret's laugh was sharp as broken glass. Oh, Jonathan, you poor deluded man, she's been playing you. The sad story, the sick child, the martyred single mother act, it's textbook manipulation. These people are experts at finding bleeding heart suckers. The words hit their target with surgical precision, landing on every doubt Jonathan had carried about his own motivations. Was this just guilt? Midlife crisis? Some kind of savior complex projected onto a woman who'd simply been doing her job? But then he heard Caleb in the kitchen, carefully counting out his morning medications the way his mother had taught him, and the doubts crumbled. You're wrong, he said simply. Am I? Then explain why she hasn't called you. Haven't you wondered why? If she's so grateful for your help, she hasn't reached out? It's because she got what she needed. Medical bills paid, probably some cash, a white knight to rescue her from consequences. Now she's calculating how much more she can squeeze out of this situation. The accusation landed like a punch to the solar plexus because it contained a grain of truth that hurt to examine. Nadia hadn't called. He'd been at the hospital until late, then spent the night caring for Caleb, and his phone had been full of business calls, but none from her. She's in the hospital, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. She was discharged this morning at 6 a.m. I checked. So where is she, Jonathan? If this connection is so real, so meaningful, why isn't she here taking care of her own child? The question hung in the air like poison gas. Jonathan looked toward the kitchen where Caleb was making breakfast, a slice of stale bread with peanut butter, eaten standing up because he wasn't tall enough to reach the counter properly. Why hadn't Nadia called? Why hadn't she come straight home? Where was she? I'll tell you where she is, Margaret continued, pressing her advantage. She's meeting with lawyers, figuring out how much she can sue me for, how much she can get from you for playing the hero. People like her, they see people like us as lottery tickets, walking ATMs to be milked until we're dry. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? I've been dealing with household staff for 20 years. I know the games they play, the sob stories they spin, the way they weaponize our guilt. Margaret's voice turned almost gentle, motherly. You're a good man, Jonathan. Too good. And she's taking advantage of that goodness. The line went quiet, except for the sound of Jonathan's own breathing. In the distance, Caleb was humming again, that same wordless melody that had become the soundtrack to his transformation. But doubt, once planted, grew like weeds in fertile soil. The questions multiplied. Why hadn't Nadia called? Where was she now? Had the connection he'd felt been real, or just projection? Was he the hero of this story, or the fool? His business phone buzzed with another text from Morrison. Emergency board meeting in 1 hour. Your position is being reviewed. Everything was falling apart at once. His business empire, built over decades of careful calculation and ruthless determination, was crumbling because he'd chosen to care about a woman who might not even care about him. A woman who might be exactly what Margaret Henderson said she was. The rational thing would be to cut his losses, return to his penthouse, salvage what he could of the Riverside deal, rebuild his reputation with the board, write off the past 24 hours as temporary insanity brought on by too much exposure to sentiment. From the kitchen came the sound of something falling, a glass hitting the floor, followed by Caleb's sharp intake of breath that sounded wrong, labored, panicked. "Mr. Jonathan." The call was barely a whisper, strangled by airways that had suddenly betrayed him. "I can't breathe good." Jonathan dropped both phones and ran. Caleb sat on the kitchen floor surrounded by shards of glass and scattered Cheerios, his small chest rising and falling in rapid, shallow movements that sounded like a broken accordion. His lips had taken on a bluish tint that made Jonathan's blood turn to ice water. "Okay, buddy, it's okay," Jonathan said, though nothing felt okay about watching a 6-year-old struggle for air. He knelt carefully among the glass, his expensive suit forgotten as he reached for the rescue inhaler they'd bought the night before. "2 puffs, remember? Just like you showed me." Caleb's hands shook as he accepted the inhaler, and Jonathan could see the fear in those wide eyes, not just fear of the attack itself, but the deeper terror of being alone when your body betrays you. The same fear that had lived in Jonathan's chest when Emma was born with her heart defect, when doctors spoke in careful euphemisms about complications and possibilities. 1 puff, Jonathan counted, keeping his voice steady even as his heart hammered against his ribs. "Good, now wait." And another. The second puff seemed to help marginally, but Caleb's breathing was still labored, still wrong. Jonathan remembered Nadia's notebook with its careful instructions, found it on the counter, and flipped through pages of handwritten medical wisdom born from desperate necessity. If rescue inhaler doesn't provide relief within 15 minutes, or if lips' fingernails turn blue, call 911 immediately. Caleb's lips were definitely blue. Jonathan reached for his phone just as it rang. Morrison again, the caller ID flashing like an emergency beacon from his old life. "Don't answer it," Caleb whispered between careful breaths. "Mama says when someone's hurt, everything else can wait." The wisdom of children. Jonathan declined the call and dialed 911. 911? "What's your emergency?" "I have a 6-year-old having a severe asthma attack. His lips are blue, rescue inhaler isn't working effectively." Jonathan rattled off the address, while one part of his mind marveled at how natural it felt to put Caleb's needs before everything else. "Paramedics are en route. Stay on the line with me." What followed were the longest 12 minutes of Jonathan's life since Emma's surgery. He sat on the floor with Caleb leaning against his chest, counting breaths, timing intervals between inhaler doses, doing everything Nadia's careful notes had taught him. The boy was fighting hard, his small body working overtime just to pull air into rebellious lungs. Tell me a story," Caleb whispered. "About Captain Wheeze." So Jonathan did, making up adventures about the brave bear who learned to fly despite his breathing problems, who saved other stuffed animals when they got scared, who proved that courage wasn't the absence of fear but the decision to keep going anyway. His voice became a lifeline, something for Caleb to focus on besides the struggle for air. The paramedics arrived as Jonathan was describing Captain Wheeze's victory over the dragon of difficult breathing. Professional, efficient. They had Caleb on oxygen within minutes, and his color started improving almost immediately. "You did good," the lead paramedic told Jonathan as they prepared to transport Caleb to Presbyterian Hospital. Quick thinking, right response. "Are you the father?" "I'm." Jonathan paused, unsure how to explain what he was. Not family, not friend exactly, but something that didn't have a name yet. "I'm someone who cares about him." It was enough. When has caring for someone else's child felt like the most important thing in the world? Share how stepping up for a young person changed you. At the hospital, Jonathan sat in the same waiting room where he'd left Nadia the day before, but everything felt different now. Yesterday he'd been playing Good Samaritan, acting out some half-understood impulse toward decency. Today he was simply where he belonged, beside a child who needed him, period. His phones had been buzzing constantly. The board meeting was starting without him. The Riverside investors were probably boarding planes back to Tokyo. His carefully constructed empire was collapsing in real time while he sat in plastic chairs that had seen too much grief, waiting for news about a boy who wasn't even his own. He didn't care. The realization should have terrified him. Instead, it felt like freedom. "Mr. Mitchell?" He looked up to find Nadia standing in the doorway, still wearing yesterday's clothes, her left arm in a sling, her face gray with exhaustion and fear. But she was here, she'd come. "Where is he? How is he?" "The nurse said severe asthma attack, and her voice broke. "I should have been there, I should have been home. He's okay. They've got him stabilized, breathing treatments are working." Jonathan stood, surprised by how relieved he felt to see her. "Where were you?" "Working." The word came out flat, bitter. "Mrs. Henderson called this morning, said if I didn't come in to officially resign and sign some papers, she'd make sure I never worked childcare in this city again. I thought I could handle it quick and get back to Caleb before." She was shaking, he realized. Not from cold but from the particular exhaustion that comes from fighting battles you can't win while the people you love pay the price. "She made you leave the hospital to resign. Said I was lucky she wasn't pressing charges for endangering Grace. Said the severance package she was offering was contingent on my immediate cooperation and signed confidentiality agreements." Nadia's laugh was sharp as broken glass. $500 to disappear quietly and never speak about what happened. The cruelty was breathtaking in its calculated precision. Margaret Henderson had known exactly when to strike, when Nadia was most vulnerable, most desperate, most likely to sign anything to avoid worse consequences. "You didn't sign anything, did you?" "Of course I signed it." Nadia's voice carried the weight of defeated pragmatism. $500 buys a lot of inhaler refills, and she was right, who would believe me over her anyway? "I'm just the nanny who dropped the baby." Something cold and sharp settled in Jonathan's chest. Margaret Henderson hadn't just been poisoning his mind with doubts about Nadia's motives, she'd been actively ensuring those doubts would seem justified. Force Nadia to choose between caring for her son and defending herself, then use her absence as proof of her guilt. It was exactly the kind of strategic cruelty Jonathan had practiced for decades in the corporate world. He recognized it because he'd perfected it. "Jonathan," Nadia's voice was soft now, uncertain. "What you did, staying with Caleb, taking care of him, I don't know how to thank you, but I also don't know why you did it. People like you don't usually." "People like me?" "Rich people. Successful people. People who have better things to do than sit in emergency rooms with other people's children." She studied his face as if trying to solve a puzzle. "What do you want from us?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with every assumption, every barrier of class and race and experience that had shaped their different worlds. Jonathan understood why she had to ask it. In her experience, kindness from people in his position always came with a price tag. His phone buzzed again. Morrison's name on the screen, followed immediately by another call from his lawyer, then his accountant, then the head of his largest investment fund. His old life was calling, demanding he return to the world where people's worth was measured in quarterly profits and annual growth. He could go back, salvage what remained of the Riverside deal, rebuild his reputation, return to the careful isolation of wealth and power. Nadia had already signed the papers absolving him of any further obligation. Caleb was stable and would recover. He'd played the hero long enough to assuage whatever crisis of conscience had overtaken him. Or he could choose something else entirely. Jonathan turned off both phones and put them in his jacket pocket. "What I want," he said slowly, "is to be the kind of person who deserves to be in this room with you and your son. I want to be the kind of man who chooses what's right over what's profitable. I want to be someone Caleb can believe in, and someone you don't have to fear." Nadia's eyes filled with tears. "But your business, everything you've built, I built it wrong." The words came out stronger than he'd expected, carrying certainty that surprised him. "I built it on other people's suffering, on families like yours being disposable, on children like Caleb not mattering as much as profit margins. You can't just throw your life away for us, we're not your responsibility. No, Jonathan agreed. You're not my responsibility, you're my choice. A nurse appeared in the doorway, smiling. Caleb's asking for both of you, his breathing is much better, and he wants to show you how the nebulizer machine looks like a dragon. As they walked toward Caleb's room together, Nadia still limping slightly from her injuries, Jonathan still wrinkled and unshaven from sleeping on a child's narrow bed, Jonathan felt something he hadn't experienced in years. He felt like he was walking toward home instead of away from it. The choice had been made. Whatever came next, he would face it as the man he wanted to be rather than the man he used to be. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Jonathan's penthouse, but the space looked nothing like it had half a year ago. Gone were the sterile marble surfaces and cold contemporary furniture. In their place, a sectional sofa with permanent pillow forts, a kitchen table covered in Caleb's artwork, and a corner dedicated to medical equipment that now looked less like a hospital and more like part of a home where love happened to require extra oxygen. Caleb sat at the kitchen island, carefully arranging blueberries on his pancakes while humming the same wordless melody that had become the soundtrack to their unlikely family. His breathing was better now, not perfect, would probably never be perfect, but managed with the kind of comprehensive care that came from having access to the best specialists, the right medications, and a mother who no longer had to choose between work and worry. 5 more minutes until Mama graduates, Caleb announced, consulting the digital clock with the same precision he once used for inhaler timing. Then she'll be Nurse Mama instead of just Mama. Jonathan smiled, adjusting his tie, not the $1,000 silk of his former life, but something simpler, more real. Today Nadia would graduate from the nursing program she'd returned to 3 months ago, funded by the sale of half his portfolio. The Riverside development had died along with most of his other projects when he'd walked away from that life, but watching her dreams resurrect from the ashes of desperation felt like a better return on investment than any profit margin he'd ever achieved. And then we're having the biggest celebration ever, Jonathan added, flipping pancakes with the skill that came from 6 months of morning breakfast duty. Balloons, cake, and Aunt Nadia gets to help sick kids like she always wanted to. The title Aunt Nadia had emerged organically from Emma during her first weekend visit to the penthouse. Jonathan's daughter, initially suspicious of sharing her father's attention, had fallen completely under Caleb's spell within an hour. Watching them together, Emma with her designer clothes and private school vocabulary, Caleb with his second-hand everything and hard-won wisdom, had shown Jonathan that love really could bridge any gap if you let it. "Daddy, are you crying?" Emma appeared in the doorway, already dressed for the graduation ceremony in the blue dress she'd picked out specifically for Aunt Nadia's special day. "Happy tears, sweetheart. Sometimes grown-ups cry when they're really, really happy." Emma nodded solemnly, accepting this explanation with the same matter-of-fact wisdom Caleb had taught her about rescue inhalers and breathing treatments. At 7 years old, she was already learning lessons about resilience and love that her old life of privilege never would have provided. The elevator chimed, and Nadia emerged looking radiant in her new nursing scrubs, the white coat that had taken her 8 years to earn finally draped over her shoulders. She moved differently now, still careful because of Caleb, still determined because that was who she was, but without the desperate edge of someone fighting the world alone. "How's my graduate?" Jonathan asked, kissing her forehead in the easy way that had developed between them, not romantic yet, but something deeper than friendship, something that didn't need labels to be real. "Nervous, excited, terrified, I'm going to trip walking across the stage." She laughed, the sound bright and unguarded. "Mrs. Patterson always said pride goes before a fall, but I think she'd make an exception today." Mrs. Patterson had become their honorary grandmother, a role she embraced with fierce joy. The neighborhood had watched their unlikely family form with everything from suspicion to curiosity to eventual pride. The millionaire who'd moved into Oak Street, not to gentrify but to belong, had become something of a local legend. Have you ever seen love create a family from the most unexpected pieces? Share how unconventional families have touched your life. Mama, look what I made. Caleb held up his latest artistic creation, a drawing of 4 stick figures holding hands under a rainbow, with "My Family" written in careful kindergarten letters across the top. That's beautiful, baby. But you spelled family wrong. No, I didn't, Caleb said with the confidence of childhood. I spelled my family. We're different from other families, so we get different spelling. The logic was unassailable, and Jonathan felt that familiar tightness in his chest, not the panic of his old life, but the overwhelming fullness that came from being loved unconditionally by children who saw the world through hearts instead of calculators. They drove to the graduation ceremony in Jonathan's new car, a practical SUV that could accommodate car seats and medical equipment, and all the beautiful chaos of real life. The riverside neighborhood they passed through looked different now. Where luxury condos were supposed to stand, a community health center was under construction, funded by the sale of Jonathan's yacht, and designed with input from families like theirs. The nursing school auditorium buzzed with the energy of dreams realized and futures beginning. Jonathan found himself scanning the crowd, seeing not demographics or income levels, but stories of struggle and triumph that he'd been blind to for 42 years. When Nadia's name was called, when she walked across that stage to receive her degree, the cheers from their row were the loudest in the building. Emma and Caleb jumped up and down, waving handmade signs. Jonathan clapped until his hands hurt, tears streaming down his face without shame. This was what victory looked like. Not stock prices or board approvals or magazine covers, but a woman who'd refused to let circumstances define her, finally getting the chance to heal others the way she'd healed him. After the ceremony, as they celebrated with cake and balloons in the hospital cafeteria, Nadia's first shift started in 2 hours. Jonathan's old phone rang. He'd kept one line active for legal necessities and communication with Emma's mother. The caller ID showed Morrison's name. "Aren't you going to answer it?" Nadia asked, noticing his hesitation. "Later," Jonathan said, declining the call. "Right now, I'm exactly where I need to be." But Caleb, with his uncanny ability to sense adult undercurrents, looked up from his cake. "Is that the angry man from your old job? How do you know about that? I hear you sometimes when you think I'm sleeping. You talk to Mama about the people who are mad at you for choosing us." Caleb considered this with his usual gravity. "But Captain Wheeze says sometimes you have to make people angry to do the right thing." Out of the mouths of babes, Jonathan knelt down to Caleb's level, looking into those wise eyes that had taught him what courage really meant. "You know what, buddy? Captain Wheeze is absolutely right. And you know what else? I'm not sorry for choosing you. Not even a little bit." "I know," Caleb said simply. "That's why you're my dad now, even if it's not official yet." The words hit Jonathan like lightning, illuminating truths he'd been too afraid to name. He looked up to find Nadia watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read, hope and fear and something deeper, more tender. "Caleb," she said softly, "we talked about this. Jonathan has his own family, his own daughter. But families can be bigger," Emma interrupted, speaking for the first time since the graduation. "Daddy, you're happier now. You laugh more. You read me stories. You make pancakes without burning them." She paused, considering. "I think our family got better when we added more people to it." Jonathan felt the final wall around his heart crumble into dust. For 6 months he'd been careful not to push, not to assume, not to impose his feelings on people who'd already endured enough from men with power and privilege. But sitting in this hospital cafeteria, surrounded by the most unlikely family ever assembled, he finally understood what Nadia had tried to tell him that first day. Love wasn't about what you could take from someone, it was about what you could give and keep giving, until giving became as natural as breathing. Nadia, he said quietly, his voice carrying all the certainty he'd once reserved for hostile takeovers and billion-dollar negotiations. I love you, I love Caleb, I love the life we've built together, and I love who I am when I'm with you. I know it's complicated, I know I have a lot to make up for, but if you'll have me, really have me, not just as the guy who helps out but as family, then I'm all in, forever. The cafeteria noise faded to background hum as Nadia studied his face, looking for the catch, the hidden agenda, the eventual betrayal that her experience had taught her to expect from men like him. Instead, she found only love. Imperfect, uncertain, but absolutely real love that had transformed a stranger into something like salvation. "Are you sure?" she whispered. "Because we're not going anywhere. This is our world, night shifts and nebulizer treatments and generic brand everything. It's not glamorous. It's perfect," Jonathan said, and meant it with every cell in his body. "You're perfect, this family is perfect, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving I deserve to be part of it." When Nadia kissed him, soft and sweet and tasting like cake frosting and new beginnings, Caleb cheered so loudly the entire cafeteria turned to look. Emma clapped with delight, and somewhere in the distance, Jonathan's old phone buzzed with another call from another life he no longer wanted. He let it ring. 6 months ago, a baby had slipped from trembling arms, and two strangers had learned the difference between falling and flying. Today, in a hospital cafeteria that smelled like antiseptic and hope, that same fall had become the foundation for a love that lifted everyone it touched. Tell us about a moment when what seemed like the worst thing became the best thing that ever happened to you. How did crisis become blessing in your life? As they gathered their things to head home, all of them together the way families do, Jonathan caught sight of his reflection in the cafeteria window. The man looking back wasn't the cold, calculating businessman who'd built an empire on other people's suffering. This man had eyes that crinkled from laughing with children, hands that were gentle from caring for someone else's dreams, and a heart that beat stronger because it had learned to love without limits. Nadia was right, brave hearts do beat stronger, and sometimes, if you're very lucky, they learn to beat in rhythm with other brave hearts, creating music that sounds like home. Outside, the sun was setting over a city full of possibilities, and Jonathan Mitchell, father, partner, family man, walked into the rest of his life, surrounded by everyone who mattered, finally rich in all the ways that actually counted. The healing was complete. The love had won. And somewhere in heaven, angels were humming wordless lullabies that sounded suspiciously like hope.
If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one. Thank you for watching this story to the end.